God there. Okay, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can see it.
Okay. All right. So last week, remember we talked about suburbia in the 1950s. And so,
Hmm.
there's lots of old TV shows from the 1950s, and most, I guess, the 1950s are all black and white. And they all show like a lot of this type of this suburban life, like I have on the screen. And so last week we talked about um, last week we talked about how things happen at certain points in history because all the pieces were in place for that thing to happen, right? And so suburbia, people have always lived, just outside of a city. That's not uncommon. That's always been the case. But um, kind of last week we read the growth of suburbia, that explosion of people. Um, Moving out of the cities, but not, out into the farmland, into the country, but just kind of just outside the city, into the suburbs. That happens in the 1940s and 50s because a lot of certain things were ready at that time. The GI Bill, right? We talked about the GI Bill was
Hmm.
the GIs, the General Enlistment Soldiers, call them GIs, um, come back from World War II in the 40s, and they're mostly young men. They're ready to pick up life where they left off, or maybe they missed their college years and they're ready to go. So the GI Bill set up a bunch of things for them to get free or very inexpensive education, go back to college, and a lot of other things. But also made it very easy. Not they weren't giving away houses, but it made it very easy for soldiers and a lot of people to buy houses, get that mortgage with a very small down payment. Um, then you have mass production of housing. Levitt and Sons builders built towns, whole towns, which were then called Levittown. And there's three Levitt towns in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Um, so it happened at that time because like things were ready for it to happen. Um, and that's an interesting idea. Why do things happen at a certain point in history? Well, normally it's because it couldn't have happened 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Things were just in place for it to happen at that time. Today, we're going to look at the dark side of suburbia. So it was really easy for GIs, those soldiers coming out of World War II, really easy for them to buy houses, right? Housing was very affordable. We talked about those Levittown houses being costing $7,000. Well, that was $7,000 was more money in 1950s than it is today, right? It was a lot of money, but it wasn't. It was still rather cheap for a house. It was very affordable. Today, you buy a house for $7,000, you think you're doing pretty darn good. You can buy a couple of houses for $7,000 um, if you take out a loan, maybe. But um, even then, $7,000 was a lot of money, but it was still surprisingly affordable. Okay, just like we talked about in when we talked about the 20s, we talked about the Ford's Model T car. It costs $300 to buy a car, a brand new car. It's a pretty big deal. So we'll look at the dark side of suburbia. What is there? There's always in American history inequalities, right? Many of them often racial. So today we're going to look at some things. It says these are the big things we're going to hit, right? This is kind of a preview of what we'll discuss. Geographic living patterns, where people go. Geographic living patterns in the United States changed during the post-war era as more Americans moved to western and southern states. So people are moving around the country to the west and to the south. Suburban living promoted the use of automobiles for transportation. We've looked at cars before in the 1920s, which led to a vast expansion of America's highway system. If you've driven out on the highway lately, you're driving on a road that was largely built in the 1950s, right?
Mm.
I mean, they've repaved it. Hopefully they've repaved it since the 1950s. But I have a little map here, and we're going to look at the interstate, the big highways that take you around the country. Those are from the 1950s. Because why did it happen then? Because you didn't need it in the 1930s. But the 1950s, there's enough people driving enough places, and not only for you to get to grandma's house, but also to move goods around, right? Um, it's nice to make it easier or for you to take a vacation, but also, why would Congress pay millions and millions of dollars to build an interstate highway system? It's not just for you to visit people on Thanksgiving, it's to move trucks full of goods for sale, right? That's what's going to make things happen.
Mhm.
So it says suburbans or the suburbs emphasis on conformity, everybody being the same, conforming to the same patterns, had negative effects on both white women and minorities. Many white women began to feel trapped in the role of housewife, while restrictive covenants, a covenant is the agreement you have to, the agreement that you sign when you move into a neighborhood. They do exist in some places, normally fancier, more expensive neighborhoods in towns, but they were a thing back then, and we're going to look at that. Restrictive covenants barred most African Americans and Asian American families from living in suburban neighborhoods at all.
Mm.
Okay. So the 1950s, a lot of people are living in the middle class. The middle class is a good place to be. You can afford, things are very affordable. Jobs generally paid well. The economy was pretty good. Normally, coming out of a big war, the economy is going strong. Um, let me say, if you've won that war, right? Um, Nazi Germany after World War II, their economy was in tatters because they lost World War II. We won World War II, and so through the 40s, 50s, our economy was going pretty strong. So when the economy's strong, jobs pay well, companies are doing well, people are buying stuff, everything from shoes to bread to houses. So that means prices can be low and affordable on everything from cars to houses to books, everything you need. So let's jump in. Suburbia, USA. It says Levitt and Sons, those builders that built a lot of stuff, went on to build two more highly successful suburbs in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, both of which they also named Levittown. We looked on the map last week. Levittown, Pennsylvania is out towards Philadelphia. Um, and other developers quickly adopted their formula for suburban housing.
We went to now I want you to know that we've been to Suburbia before.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, we actually been past that. We went. Are you familiar with what was that? Oh yeah, I remember. Silver Lake Nature Center. You know that?
No, okay. Is that
Well,
outside of the city?
yeah, that's in Bucks County. Levittown's in Bucks County, and that's where we went there for one of my
Okay.
sis for my one of my sister's birthday. We went there to celebrate her birthday. We took her out for her fourth birthday and her eighth birthday. We went there for her fourth birthday and her eighth birthday.
Well, that's cool.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. So a lot of stuff, not just they're building like Levitt and Sons was building
Mhm.
whole neighborhoods so big that basically you're building a town.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And so when you build a town, you got to build the things that go with it. People want stuff to do. You got to build churches and grocery stores and a police department. And, if you're building that many houses, even if you're just a private company, just a builder, you have to plan for those things. So there's public gardens and theme parks and all kinds of stuff to make it attractive for people to buy a house in that town. So yeah, that's cool that you've been to something like that. So it says between 1948 and 58, 85% of the new homes built in the United States were located in suburbs. Okay, so the vast majority, 85% of new homes in the country are being built not in cities or out on the farm, but in the suburbs. And that actually probably shouldn't be too surprising. Suburban construction across the country also meant that regional differences of architecture and urban planning began to erode in favor of identical housing across the United States. This suburban trend has endured. Today, 4 out of 5 Americans live in the suburbs. So that's interesting. As more and more houses get built around the country by these big builders, um, who can build things very cheaply, they can build 100 houses at a time and make them very affordable. The houses that you build in Michigan are very similar to the houses you build down in Florida or up in New York. So, because it's easier to make a ton of things that are all the same, right? It's easier and cheaper for that company to build all the houses. They have the plans, everything's the same. So there's no styles of houses. So, if you're interested in architecture and go into a new city, maybe you travel someplace new and you see the houses look a little bit different. Those are probably older houses. Houses built in the 50s across the country all start to kind of look the same, and I think that's kind of interesting to think about. Um, Monique, could you read paragraph 2 for us?
Living in suburbia meant that residents had to own their own cars in order to go to work or purchase groceries. By 1955, American automobile companies were producing 8 million cars per year, more than 3 times as many as in 1945. Likewise, the system of roads had to expand in order to meet the demand of an increasingly car oriented society. State and federal government invested heavily in interstate highway system in the late 1940s and 1950s. Suburbia helped to promote a car culture in the United States that made it easier to drive than to take public transportation.
Okay. And probably we've all either experienced or can easily imagine, no matter where you live, you've seen or can imagine the differences between city living and suburban living, right? Um, in the city, there's, lots of people don't even own a car. Okay. Especially in real big cities like New York City, people of all economic brackets, rich people and rich people and poor people choose or can't afford or simply choose, excuse me, to not own a car. Take a taxi. Now, today you have Lyft and Uber, and it's really easy to get around. You walk. There's a grocery store close enough to your house that you can walk to. Now, if you live in the suburbs, in a nice big town, in Levittown or any place, lots of places across Pennsylvania, you live a couple of miles uh, from even the closest grocery store, even a lot of places, the only place to shop in town is sometimes Walmart. Now, much of Pennsylvania is actually not suburban, but it becomes it's so spread out that it's actually considered rural, countryside, rural, not urban or suburban. But if you think about those suburbs, especially around Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and around lots of cities, um, you can't really do much without a car. You need a car. Everything's far enough away from your home that it requires a car. Well, if people, um, if enough people need cars and buy cars, then we become a nation of car owners. Um, so so I put a picture here of the interstate highway system. Now that came from, it says states and federal governments invested heavily in an interstate highway system. The federal government, Congress, um, passed laws and made plans and planned out the interstate. So if you go out on I-80, uh, what are the other interstates across Pennsylvania? 80 is the big one. It goes kind of across the northern part of Pennsylvania. Um, the Turnpike 76 is, I think, an interstate
I
road.
95,
I-95 that cuts the whole,
right through the
you can see
country.
it. Yeah, you can see on this map. It goes the whole way from New England down the coast all the way into Florida. I-95 is a big one. So those interstate, those I-95, I-80 stands for interstate. Those are a way to connect. Now, let's also think historically. We've talked about, a little while ago, we've talked about the the 50s is right in the middle of the Cold War, right? So the other the other motivation to build this interstate system, um, that I don't think this here mentions, but the other thing that people mention about when you talk about Congress and the states investing a lot of money to make this interstate system happen, they felt that, hey, when those this is the Cold War, when those Russians shoot those atomic missiles over at us and they blow up New York City, kind of a crazy thought, but they were convinced when the Russians blow up New York City or blow up Houston, Texas, we need a system to get millions of people out of that area and moving around the country. I mean, there was always been highways across the country, right? But if, it's really easy to drive a lot of people very quickly on, say, I-80, I-95, the turnpike, right? Rather than just the little back roads through your town. So that was another concern. Everybody's driving cars, everybody's people and goods, economic activity or needs to be moved around. But also it's the Cold War. They're literally thinking, boy, when Russia blows up, when the Soviet Union sends an atomic bomb over and blows up half the country, we need highways to move people around, which is kind of crazy. But that's part of the story of the interstate highway system. Jendaya, could you read paragraph 3?
The war and its aftermath also changed American living patterns on a large scale. Yeah. Defense plants in the southern and western United States drew workers during the war, and the following decades, more American moved to the warmer states of the Summit in search of jobs. The population of California doubled between 1940 and 1960. Florida's population nearly tripled in the same period. In general, people people, jobs, and money began to move away from the industrial states of the Northeast and the upper Midwest and into the South and West.
Okay, so again, looking at the big picture of history, thank you for reading. The big picture of history, people are moving around the country. Now it says um, lots of Americans move to the warmer states of the Sun Belt in search of jobs. Maybe you've never heard that word before. What do we think the Sun Belt is?
Sunbelt. Hmm. Warmer places, no?
Yeah, warmer places.
Okay.
Let me see if we have, okay, I'm just Googling Sun Belt
The,
states.
the
So yeah, this
type of-
is the Sun Belt is, yeah, warmer places across the country. So
okay.
the South, right? So the South, Texas, the Southwest, what is this? New Mexico, Arizona, um, California. Okay. So here's uh, here's another map. Okay, you have the Sun Belt, the wheat belt. What do you think is grown in the wheat belt?
It's growing weeds.
Yeah, it's just the places that tend to grow wheat. The frost belt is where it's very cold. I don't know what the jello, I think these are jokes. I don't know, who knows what I clicked on. The jello belt and the unchurched belt. There are less religious people in the Pacific, what's called the Pacific Northwest. So maybe that's, I don't know if this is a joke or not. But the unchurched belt. Uh, but that's the Sun Belt. Okay. And it's
Mhm.
good to be able to, when you're doing that, when you're taking that test, to read a new word that you're not familiar with, but still, you got to make sense of it. So that
Mhm.
people are moving to the warmer states of the Sun Belt. Population in California doubles, Florida triples in the same
Mhm.
period. People are moving south.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, why did that happen then? Do you know why? Because in the 50s is when we invented air conditioning, right? If
Mhm.
you're in the 20, for hundreds of years before that, why would you move to California where it's baking hot 10 months out of the year? But then all of a sudden, You have air conditioning. It is a affordable thing. It exists. It's been invented, and it's affordable in people's homes. Now you have air conditioning. Now I'm interested in moving to Florida if I can have a house with air conditioning, right? So things change. Things are invented that make history happen in certain times, in certain ways. Race, okay, so that's, people are moving around the country for different reasons, economic, and I think the invention of air conditioning is important.
Yeah.
Um, and so the population's moving around. Cars, highway systems make all this possible. Um, Here's a good long paragraph 4. Guisha, could you read paragraph 4 for us?
Okay. With its cookie cutter houses and firm emphasis of material comfort, from shiny new car to washing machines, Suburbia received its share of criticism. What most appalled critics was Suburbia's emphasis on sameness and conformity. On one hand, this sameness heralded and, and a kind of demer- democratic,
Democratic.
a democratic progress. Suburban families made about the same amount of money, lived in industrial or nearly industrial houses, and generally were at about the same stage in life. Class division narrowed as barrier to home ownership, fair and the post-war economic boom elevate many families into the middle class. Even non-stand prejudice based on religious and insincerity,
Ethnicity.
ethnicity enrolled in the suburb as the shared experience of GLS during the war were more important than difference between Italian American and German American or Catholic and Jews.
Okay, thank you. So, it says with its cookie cutter houses, right? A cookie cutter, like if you picture you roll out your dough to make cookies and you use a cookie cutter, it means that all the houses are the same, like we talked about. And a firm emphasis on material comforts, from shiny new cars to washing machines. It's very materialistic. Everybody's the same. All the houses are the same. Everybody wants the same cars. Everybody wants to look the same, living the same life. It's People don't like that for its sameness and conformity, right? You lose your individuality, ethnically and personally in your family. But it says on the one hand, it's kind of democratic. Everybody's equal. Um, People make about the same money, lived in nearly identical houses at the same stage in life. So class divisions narrowed, right? If you have a Levitt town with all the houses are the same, you can't really tell who's the richest person in town anymore. Um, but so this is kind of the good side of things. Even long-standing prejudices based on religion and ethnicity eroded or disappeared in the suburbs. As shared experiences of GIs, the guys who are coming back from war, their shared experiences are more important than the differences between, are you an Italian American or a German American or a Catholic or a Jew or a Protestant, or you know so everybody is sharing these experiences now. So everybody's kind of equal.
Get it? Hey, hey, hey.
Okay. So uh, So it says, but this conformity also had a dark side.
Mm,
For white women, the charms, the good things of suburban life began to wear thin after a few years. Although it should not be forgotten that more than 30% of women did work outside the home in some capacity during the 1950s. So not everybody, not all women were living at home, staying at home, taking care of the kids, cooking and cleaning.
mm,
30% of women worked outside the home, but the opposite of that means 70% of women didn't work. Okay.
mm,
I mean, 30%, it's not zero. So there are some, about a third of women are working outside the, are working, right? But it says popular culture was replete, filled with messages counseling women that their greatest satisfaction in life would come from raising children, tending to their husband's needs, and owning all of the labor saving household appliances that money could buy. All these new little electric gadgets, the things we have in our kitchens, toasters, toaster ovens,
mhm,
mixers. Um, Although they didn't have quite, I don't think they had microwaves back then. Maybe microwaves started to come around. But many began to identify a creeping sense that there ought to be more to life than childcare and housework, right? So, though it wasn't all women who worked, who stayed at home and were housewives,
mhm,
most were, right? And they were encouraged to just be happy, raise your children, make your husband happy when he comes home from his work, from his job. That's the best life you can lead, right? That's the message that they were getting in the 1950s, at least for white women.
mhm.
Okay. Olawakimi, could you read paragraph 6?
Okay. Minority women did not experience the boredom of suburban life because by, by and large they were barred from suburbia altogether. William Levitt was an unapologetic segregationalist, declaring openly that his subdivisions were for whites only. In 1950, not a single resident of Levittown, New York, was black. Suburbs throughout the nation enacted restrictive covenants that prevented homeowners from selling their houses to African Americans or Asian Americans upon the pretense that their presence will lower property values. Although the Supreme Court ruled in 1948 that such covenants were unenforceable, de facto, segregation, de facto segregation continued and was frequently enforced by violence and intimidation.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of these neighborhoods that are being built have agreements that you have to sign when you buy a house or have kind of like neighborhood rules, these restrictive covenants. To restrict means to keep somebody from doing something, right? And a covenant is like a agreement that you sign. So these neighborhoods, whole towns have restrictive covenants saying minorities cannot buy a house in this town because if we do, the racist thinking went, if we let minorities start buying houses, all the property values will go down. Um, it was racist, but that's what they did. So then it says the Supreme Court rules in 1948, even before this time we're talking about, the Supreme Court says that such covenants were unenforceable. Okay, they're racist. So you can't. It's against the law to enforce such covenants. But it says de facto segregation continued and was frequently enforced by violence and intimidation. Now, de facto, I don't know if that is that a Latin term? I'm not sure. But if something is so segregation is illegal, right? They said you can't make those rules about your neighborhood. Keep saying that minorities cannot buy a house. And yet, it says 12 years after that, in 1960, not a single resident of Levittown, New York was black. So the rules, they're unofficial rules. So what does de facto mean? if de facto segregation still exists,
Mhm.
what do you think de facto means? That's a good term to know.
Is it possible that it means they were enforced regardless
Yeah, I think it basically means of the fact,
of the
right?
fact? Like
So,
they enforced it on their own regardless of law.
right, yeah. So it was illegal to have those rules, but the fact of the matter is those rules basically existed because people followed it. Let's think of another example. Um, well, I don't know. I can't think of another example. But de facto means it's not official, but it still happens, right? The fact of the matter is it still happens. Um, so de facto segregation, and we've read, a long time ago, we've read before about, I think in the spring or winter, we talked about the Little Rock Nine, right? Those kids who in Arkansas, I think it was like 1953 or something. Um, they were the first kids, black kids, to start to go to a school of all white kids. Um, it was illegal to segregate back then, and yet it still happened. There was de facto segregation. It was you couldn't do it, but people did it. The fact is, it still happened. So, that's a good term, de facto. Um, it just kind of means unofficial, or it means it shouldn't have happened, but it was happening. It just means it's a fact that segregation was happening. Okay, and it says banks also refuse to loan money for new homes or improvements in the inner city neighborhoods where minorities lived in a practice known as redlining, a term derived from mortgage security maps that shaded minority neighborhoods in red, signifying they were risky investments. Thus, government subsidies for suburban home building and prejudice against lending to minorities combined to increase the distance, both physically and economically, between whites and African Americans. So, let's say you're a black family in the 50s living, let's say, in a city because you weren't allowed to buy one of these new houses in the suburbs. um, let's say you're not poor, you're middle class, but you're living in the city. Well, you go to the bank, you say, well, I want to buy it, I want to fix up our bathroom, right? So you need a little bit of a loan, so you go to the bank and you say, I'd like to improve our bathroom at our house. um, I need to borrow a few $1,000s. Well, what would be easy for other people is impossible for you because the bank, literally, they have maps where the bank decides we're not going to loan money to people who live in this particular neighborhood, usually inner city, places where minorities would live, because they're risky investments. Oh, if I'm the bank says if I loan money to those people, they may not pay me back. Meanwhile, you could walk into the bank and say, "Hey, here's my paycheck. Here's proof of my job. I'll pay the money back." And yet they say, "Or we don't do that. We don't loan to people that literally live in that neighborhood." So redlining was a term. Some people, I used to think redlining was the practice of not selling houses to certain neighborhoods, not selling houses to minorities, which is what we're talking about also. But this says that it's the idea of not banks not loaning money, which I guess, well, I mean, a mortgage when you buy a new house, that's technically lending money. So
Matt,
maybe it does refer to that. Yeah.
when you sell your home and someone comes out to appraise it,
Hmm.
basically to give you the value, what do you call them? Are they just appraisers?
Yeah, an appraiser.
So
Yeah.
there was an article which it's kind of like the reverse of what they did then. I just was watching an article that they had put out on nightly news about a week ago, and a woman who was selling her home. She's a black woman, and she had a few appraisers come out, and they lowballed her home. So she was expecting to receive at least $120,000
Mhm.
as far as her appraisal, because that's what she had when she purchased the home. That's what it was appraised at that time. So she figured she'd get no less. So she went to three different appraisers, and each time it got lower. So what she did is she called her friend's husband, who happened to be white, to come over. She took down all the pictures in her home.
Hmm.
Anything that was African American art, she removed it all from the home. And he was there when the new appraiser had arrived. And he just filled in as if he was her husband, and he was going to be doing the walk around. Don't you know they went from $111,000 to over $250,000?
Hmm.
So that red line, in essence, it's different now.
Yeah.
Instead of doing it to get the loan, now there's that red line on trying to resell your home.
Right.
So
Right.
it still exists today.
Oh yeah. No, and that sort of thing, unfortunately that happens all over across all kinds of different areas of life. Getting a call back for an interview for a job and all kinds of stuff. But, it was definitely a problem in the 1950s. You have hundreds of thousands of these nice new homes, affordable homes. Plenty of minority people could afford them, and yet they weren't allowed to even try to buy them. Um, which those laws, the Supreme Court in 1948 says are illegal, and yet it still happened. I'm sure, looking at you said you watched a news clip, like I'm sure that news clip involves an attorney, and who that attorney said this is illegal, they can't do this, and yet it happens, you know. Um, and sometimes the motivation is straight. I mean, sometimes it's racism, but other times it's economic. They think
Well, she was
people in this
able to prove,
neighborhood.
honestly, she's actually able to prove it was racism, because the first three applications that she had filled out, she had marked she was black.
Hmm.
That fourth one, she left it blank. And
Yeah,
that was,
yeah,
yeah. So, I mean, it just shows itself. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
and here, I mean, we don't know the people, the individuals who actually did the appraisal, but hopefully they lose their jobs
yeah, yeah,
for acting like jerks.
yeah.
Ignorant.
And so we see, what was the 1950s, what, 70 years ago. So this type of thing, and it was before that too.
And it was
Um,
before, right.
you
It's,
know, but it's interesting to look back in history and see how this happens. This picture I pulled, I forget what I Googled to find it. I don't even know. I should put underneath my pictures where I found them. But this is a sign from the 1950s. We want white tenants in our white community. People didn't want races mixing where they lived. Um, you know, it's not. I think things are better now. We don't have. There's no way you could have a. I mean, I hope there's no way you could have a neighborhood today barring people of other races from doing. But the racism then happens de facto. It still happens on a personal level. Um, but it is interesting to say. So maybe that's progress. Um, we don't have racist laws. We don't have racist towns anymore. Now just individuals are terrible people. Maybe that's an improvement. I don't know. Uh, so this suburbia, this American dream, um, isn't available to quite everybody in the 1950s. There's it's open to a lot of people, but it's cut off. It's restricted from a lot of people as well. So and that's peculiar to the 1950s. If this housing boom had happened in the 1920s, or if maybe suburbia didn't grow until the 1980s, maybe it would have played out differently, because different pieces of history are in place at different times. Um, so it's interesting to think about. And that's the end of the reading. Any questions about this?
no, I don't have any questions. That was really self explanatory.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though that our highway system was based on war. Like,
Yeah, it really was. I mean, that I'm sure that's only a part of it.
right,
Um,
right.
but no, more people were buying uh, cars. More people had cars. And again, if you're going to build a town that's so spread out as the suburbs are, people need to drive. Um, they need to try to drive one town over or 50 miles to go, buy something or see somebody.
Right.
Um,
And it wasn't so
yeah.
monopolized like it is now. Like okay, so I have to drive across the country 4 times a year. And in doing so, you notice the truth is Walmart, McDonald's, Burger King, CBS. You
Yeah.
see this on every corner in every town
Mhm.
until you get out of that town and then ta-da, it's there again. Like
Mhm.
honestly, this is what the whole entire country looks like.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
From Pennsylvania all the way across. Okay. Now some things change, like for instance, East Coast, Northern, Wawas. We have one Wawa here in Lancaster that there's a couple, but within 15 miles of me. Okay.
Mhm.
When you finally get to Virginia, Wawa stops.
Mm.
And then it turns into like a Piggly Wiggly or whatever their Southern Belt equivalent is. But
Mhm.
you notice this going through the country. And so Suburbia actually did a lot more than just houses.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
created a whole subculture
Mhm.
as far as the way we shop too.
Yeah.
Like as you see it like going down the decades, you see McDonald's pop up, you see this pop up, and then only certain ones survived.
Well, if you look back at the big um, fast food restaurants, McDonald's pops up in the 40s and 50s. McDonald's is growing a lot at this time. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, there's something
Fast food
there's
in
something to
general,
that.
when
Yeah.
you think about it, because that was frowned upon. Like my great grandmother would tell you, "Oh no,
Hmm.
we don't do that. We eat at our table. Our food comes from the grocery store, and I cook it." She hated fast food.
Hmm.
She didn't understand that what the psychological principle of the fast food industry was is now every table in that place is the family table.
Right.
And she would look at my mother and say, "You could be doing your job better."
Yeah.
She would
Yeah.
she would she'd say, "You could be doing your job better because you
Uh-huh.
should be cooking for your family. That fast crap is not good."
Mhm.
Mhm.
And she was serious, like she had a real opinion about it.
Mhm.
But she was also coming out of the 20s, lived through the 20s, went through the depression. Like you
Mhm.
made sure your kids sat down, you watched them eat their meal.
Mhm.
And so she understood the what it was like not to have a meal, like mystery meat. She explained that to us kids, and we were like, "Oh no,"
Yeah.
because they were
Uh-huh.
eating horse
Yeah. Yeah.
back
Well,
then.
right.
That's what
Right.
mystery meat was. It was horse meat.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And now they I don't think they do it anymore. I don't know,
Mhm.
but it was for a long time. That's how they fed animals too. Was
Yeah.
using horse meat. Like it was a big thing.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So yeah, that explosion of the fast food restaurant, McDonald's was like the big leader there.
Mhm.
Um, it happens in the 1950s for a reason. The car culture. This article talks about car culture. Um, the yeah, you could do all kinds of information about
Yeah.
people's desire. Fast food is. I think that I've earned the ability to just drive up to a restaurant and order food and then I'm on my way, right?
Mhm.
Whereas, like you said, your grandmother says,
Mm-mm.
"Oh, you don't deserve that. Like you cook a meal, that's what you do." But people in the 50s and obviously through today, um, see no problem with that. That immediacy and car culture. But yeah, you're right. As you drive, like you said, if you drive across the country, you see just the same things over and over and over, and
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's a big part of,
And
um,
that has not changed in almost 70 years.
yeah, yeah.
So I wonder what the new thing will be.
Yeah.
'Cause, I mean, are we always just going to stay in this subculture, or are we going to evolve? And if we do, and when, what is the next evolution as far as
Yeah.
societal culture? It's going to be interesting to watch.
Hmm. Well, I think the next thing, and I have no idea how it plays out, but like I buy a lot of stuff. I'm sorry to say, I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. That I could go out in town and pick up, but I don't. So,
Right.
I think more 100 years from now, who knows? There'll
Do
be
you think
less
the
and less
buildings?
shops.
Do you think will? And I know this. I'm trying to figure out how. Do you think that instead, because we won't need all of the stores, just kind of like malls are becoming obsolete, right? The
Yeah,
mall was
yeah.
a social gathering place that we really, the kids today, they don't really know what that is.
Hmm.
Okay, that's a whole scene that they're going to miss out on. Do you think with all of the new online ordering and the lack of needing space, I mean, we'll have to build warehouses for all the stuff, obviously.
Right.
So maybe some of those stores will turn into those warehouses. But what do you think we'll do with the space that we took up?
Yeah.
We're
I
just
don't.
now
Yeah.
disposing of? Will it become wasteland space? Will it become dangerous space for the criminally insane to do as they please? Or will we, do you think we'll start to solve problems?
Mm.
Like maybe put our homeless people in those abandoned spaces and take care of them, or make affordable housing. What do you think?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it, if we had this class 100 years from now, I think we would be. I think something's going to happen.
Mm.
Um, like you said, the more we all buy from Amazon and online, like there's no store to go to, but you're right, there needs to be huge, and Amazon does have huge
Yeah.
warehouses. So, I mean, I think in the future, everybody's going to be either in computers or truck driving
Mm.
because everything's still got to
Crazy.
be driven around.
Right.
Um, I don't know what will happen with all this office
And I think
space
we'll
and
go from that to electric. I think maybe our truck drivers will stay gas prone because that'll keep our revenue in the gas industry going. But I think most cars, by I think it was said that like they want by 2055 everything to be electric.
yeah, yeah,
You know, so I mean, but is electricity going to change? If you look at the history of things, just in general, from the 1920s, from when we went to gas, well, 1800s really, we went from gas to electricity, from electricity to digital, right? So, now we're moving into an artificial like type of intelligence, which we didn't have back then, like, so I think once our way of distributing electricity, like just let's just say, for instance, cold fusion, we come up with that and we can harness electricity. If we do that, I think that's when we'll see that big change, kind of like we did from the 1920s to the 1950s,
hmm,
or even 18 to the 1920s, when things really took off. If you ever look, it started with the energy source, and then things just kind of snowballed, and then
yeah.
again snowballed. Yeah. And
Mm,
I like watching the repetitiveness of history. I like picking it out and going, oh, we did that once. Oh, we did that
hmm.
once. And so it's the only reason I notice it. But
Yeah, yeah.
it was just interesting.
No, yeah, that's true. You come up with a new way to power stuff, and
Mhm.
it's gonna happen. So, okay. Well, thanks. I see, Guisha, you gotta log off. Um,
Have a
no
good day,
problem.
guys.
So, yeah, thanks for a good conversation. I'll send this out. Yeah, I encourage you to read these two articles again. Um, we will. I can't remember I think we're gonna stop. For those of you going on, we're gonna stop. Um, for the summer. I think I planned my last day is going to be June. What did I say? June 17th. So we'll do three more classes. We'll do three more classes.
Well, have a good
Oh, you
summer.
you you
Uh,
you're no longer going to be in your last class is going to. You're not going to have this class anymore.
Well, yeah, for the summer. We'll pause for the summer and then we'll pick up
Oh,
at the school year.
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I apologize. Let me ask you this question. How's Mr. Rick doing?
Who?
Rick, Mr. Rick,
Oh,
teacher.
Rick. I don't run into Rick very much. Yeah, I don't know how Rick's doing. I
He
like
hasn't
Rick,
been.
but yeah, I don't see him that much.
I mean, he hasn't been in the science class in a while.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah,